So the next thing I want to do is let's deal with just writing any old file out to the file system. So let's come up into our, where's my UE? This is why it's good to put things in different files. It makes it a little easier to find things. Probably would have been a good idea if I put some of those in different files, but I'm taking advantage of everything being inside the activity to get to some data. So a better way to approach this would be to create a view model to hold onto that data. And then we could put some functions in the view model. We could add extension functions in the view model if we wanted to. It would have been a better way to get through things rather than scrolling up and down like crazy here. So I'm going to put in a few more buttons. So storage access framework write, read, and tree. And what I mean by this, write allows the user to choose a file that we're going to write out to, and then we're going to write to that file. Read is going to allow the user to choose a file to read from, and tree is going to allow the user to choose a directory that we can remember as our directory we can actually read and write to. So you only need the permission on that whole directory once. So I'm going to have these three functions: write SAF file, read SAF file, and write via tree. Let's put these down here. Let's say suspend fun him. And him. And him. And let's see what those guys look like. So we're going to start off again using this register for activity result. Storage access framework, we're going to be sending an intent behind the scenes to another activity, which is going to bring up the file chooser for us. And then we're going to get the result back in our activity result. So instead, we're going to register these as separate little chunks, which is really nice. So this guy here, we're going to be calling create document. And create document doesn't quite do everything we need by itself. Let's take a look at him real quick. He has, this one's actually much easier to read here. You can see there's not a whole lot going on here. This one here says, here's how I create the intent that's going to go send off to the other platform. And you'll see that he sets the intent's action as create document. He sets the type to any type and sets a title to whatever is passed in as the input string. When this guy gets called, we're actually passing in the name of the file that we actually want to write to by default. So that's the initial name that we put down. The user can change that name if they want to, but this is the initial name that we're going to write to. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't give us the option to explicitly say that we're writing out plain text files. So what this guy is going to do, I'm overriding the create intent to add in a couple pieces of information. So saying that I can open something and the name is text plain. This is one of the things that I had to do when I was merging the code that they defined inside the developerandroid.com page and converting it over to use register for activity result. I had to find the right contract and then make sure that the intent did what I needed it to do. And it was not quite there. So I had to add a couple extra things. So we'll see here for the parse result here, this URI is what's getting returned to this block down here. Because this is actually, we passed in the contract. The Lambda that's going to process the result just takes that URI. So inside here, once we get that URI, I'm going to do my open output stream on him. And I'm going to wrap it in a print writer. So I can just use a println. And then just write out this is a sample SAF file. So nice simple file right there. Then for the read, fairly similar. We have that register for activity result for open document. And he takes an array of MIME types as his input. So we'll see here that the string input comes in to create intent. And we're putting in the extra MIME types onto that intent to send it over to the dialog that's going to pop up. And then once we get the result coming back as that URI, we're going to open him, wrap him in a buffered reader so we can do read lines, and then say reader.read text. And then that'll just read the text in all at once. So I didn't really need a buffered reader here. I could have probably just left it with an input stream reader. So input stream reader converts from an input stream into a reader. So we're going from binary to text. So in this case, I'm going to set the text to whatever the text of that file was. So if the user hits that button, we're going to pass in saying, let the user only choose plain text files. So that's those two buttons. Let's go ahead and see if those two will work. Oh, what's going on up here? Oh, it's on click I used here. Whoops. There we go. And let's try running them. And let's see what happens when we do our SAF write. Note that it's giving us our little dialog here that we can choose. And this is the thing that I'm not super keen on Storage Access Framework. Anytime you want to write out to that external drive, you have to have the user go through this dialog. And you'll notice it doesn't give any place here to tell the user why they're doing this. So we really need to put a dialog up in between. So in this case, this is the downloads directory. I'm going to go over to either the phone or the SD card. So this phone is the internal storage. Actually, it's the local SD card storage. It's kind of weird that way. That's the virtual SD card. And then SD card is the actual plugged in SD card. So this particular emulator really has two SD cards, the virtual one and then this. And so we can pick where we want to put it. I'm going to go ahead and put it on the internal one. And I'll just save it in this Scott folder. And then when I try to read it, I can pick which file I want. This is the one that I just wrote because it has the 1 after it. And then we print the contents out. So those two, anytime we want to read a single file or write a single file like that, the user has to get involved. So it's not a great way to do things. Now, obviously, if you're doing some kind of an import-export where you want the user to choose a file to export to, or you want the user to choose a file to import from, then this makes sense. You're just going to need a dialog in between to let the user know, hey, on the next screen, it's going to let you choose which file you're writing to. So it's a little on the awkward side. I'd like to have those instructions actually on the screen itself, not exactly an ideal situation. So now let's look at this tree situation. What I'd like to do is reserve a directory on the file system that I can work with and only have to ask about it once. Before we do that, let's go back over to this guy. And I'm going to delete this Scott directory because that's the directory I'm going to write things to. And let's take a look at setting up something to write there. And what I'd like to do is keep track of the URI of whatever directory the user picks. So the user is going to pick some directory. I want to keep track of that URI. But what I'm going to do is take that URI and save it to the preferences anytime it changes. And I'm just going to go ahead and read it from the preferences whenever I need it. Not super, super efficient. For this example, the user doesn't call it very often, so it's really not bad. So let me bring up that tree URI definition. Put them up here near the top. And what this guy is he's a variable property that does not have a backing field. And what's important about that is all I'm doing is defining these getters and setters. So when somebody says tree URI, if they say tree URI equals something, it calls the setter. If they say tree URI as on the as a value for an expression, the getter will be called. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delegate the getter to grab it from a preference store. And I'm going to delegate the setter to store it in the preference store. So I'm not actually using any type of backing field. I could use a backing field as a cache value here. I didn't really think it was that worth it. So what we're going to do, Preference Manager is defined in a library called Android Preferences. But if we come in here and we try to import it, you'll notice that he's deprecated. The new Preference Manager is in Android X.preferences. So we need to import that dependency first. So let me bring up a browser and we'll say Android X preference. And I'm going to say dependency. So I'm going to go to the preference documentation and look at the declaring dependencies section. So I want to grab this guy here. Note that the preference version is 111. I'm going to come back to my build Gradle, paste him in, and do 1.1.1, sync him. That should give me my Android X preferences. And the Android X stuff, that's all what they called support libraries. The support libraries are set up so that if there's something that changes over versions of Android, we can actually use the Android X versions to be backward compatible. If I just use that deprecated one, then if I'm running on an older version of Android, an older preference manager is going to run, and he might not have all the functionality I'm looking for. Or he might do things in a less efficient way, or a buggy way, or a less secure way. By using the preference manager in Android X, by coming here and grabbing the Android X preference ones, that's a new class that is basically a copy of the one in the latest SDK that'll work in older versions as well. Now, this guy here, this edit function, is defined in, should be in that Android. Oh, I just need to import him probably. Yes. So this is defined in the Android KTX library for preferences. He's a little extension that opens this for editing and automatically commits it at the end of the block. So it's kind of similar to the use, where it does a close at the end, but in this case, it's called edit. This is different from if I did this. Normally what I would do if I were using this without that KTX is I'd call apply. I would do my put string, and then I would do a apply after. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't do the edit. Dot apply. There we go. So this edit, this is how I normally would have done it before that KTX. Explicitly go into edit mode, which gives us an editor. You can see the shared preferences editor. And then you put string and put a commit in explicitly. But by using that edit block, it takes care of the commit or the apply for us automatically. So let's see, that looks good. What's this down here now? So write via tree. Oh, I defined it twice. That's the problem. Okay, so what these guys are going to do is I have this tree URI guy, which is reading and writing from the preferences. And what I want to do is whenever I want to do that right, I want to take a look at him and see, do I already own that permission? Am I already allowed to directly write to that thing or not? If so, I can directly go ahead and do my operations, whether it's creating, reading files, renaming, deleting, whatever. If I don't have it, then I want to call OpenSAF document tree. So I actually want to launch off a request for the user to choose the directory. And the way this is working, I defined this to URI or null if no permission. So it takes this string, and if it's null, then this entire expression here is null, and Elvis takes over. That will then send us off to launch that intent, which will bring up the chooser for the user. If the tree URI is not null, we'll move on to URI or null if no permission. And what this guy is going to do is I'm going to try to get a URI from him if I already have that permission. If I don't have the permission, I'm going to return null. So let's take a look at this function. It's an extension function on string, which is going to try to convert it to a URI or null. And I'm going to check to see, hey, Mr. Content Resolver, which URI permissions do I have? And I'm going to take a look at that list. And if any of them match this predicate, I'm going to return a URI with that string value. So I'm going to parse the string into a URI. If I don't find anybody who matches this, this predicate, I'm going to return null. So instead of doing true or false and having to have an if then in there, I'm taking advantage of the null operators, to the null chaining operator here to move through. So the predicate in here says, when I'm looking at each of these permissions, does the URI of that permission, the string for it, equal the string that came in? And do I have read permission? And do I have write permission? And if all of those are true, then I have permission to use this and I can read and write that directory. If I get past that, if that comes back null, it means I don't have permission. So again, I'm going to go to the user to do their thing. Otherwise, I'm going to move through and say create file in tree, which is actually going to create a new file in that document tree. So let's see. Let's take a look at this guy first here. So what the user is going to do to choose the tree. Once again, doing that register for activity results, so that we're going to send off a request using an intent and get a response back and do something in the activity. Inside here, I'm going to say, if I get this open document tree coming back, the user's chosen a URI, and I'm going to set that to be the tree URI string. That's going to save it in my preferences so that if I reopen the application, I'm still going to have that available. I then want to tell the content resolver that I want to take hold of that permission and keep track of it. So what we do here is we're going to say, I want to keep track of the fact that I've got the read permission and the write permission, and call take persistable URI permission with the URI and then those flags for read write. That tells the content resolver that this thing, it basically adds this URI to this persisted URI permission with both read and write. Once I've gotten past that, I'm going to start up a coroutine to actually do my create. So notice that's that same thing up here. If I have permission, directly call create. Otherwise, as a result of opening this up, call create. So let's take a look at that create. So the create takes a URI as his receiver. And we're going to, once again, do this in the IO dispatcher. The API for the document tree looks a little different than normal file API. Some of the concepts are a little similar though. But what we're going to do is we're going to say, first of all, take the URI, so that's the thing passed to the create file and tree, and we're going to parse that into a document file. So this dir thing here is going to be what's called a document file. If that can't happen, so we get a null, I'm just going to throw an exception here saying I couldn't load it. Then I want to actually get the subdirectory. So kind of similar to what I did before, I'm going to say dir.find file. So the first thing I want to do is check to see, does it exist? Because I don't want to keep recreating directories if I don't need to. That was one of the mistakes I made when I was first writing this example, is that I had just blindly said create directory each time, ended up with SAF stuff 1, SAF stuff 2, SAF stuff 3, and so on, and just creating new ones every time I ran it. So I'm going to first of all look up, do I find the file? If so, I'm done. I don't do anything else here. Otherwise, Elvis kicks in and I create that directory. And if for some reason I couldn't create the directory, I'm going to go ahead and throw a runtime exception on that. Then for the file that I'm dealing with, in this case, I want to create a new file every single time. So I'm going to get the sample SAF2, sample SAF2.1, sample SAF2.2, and so on. It's just going to keep appending numbers on the end of it. So I'm going to take that directory and always create a file. It's going to be a plain text file with this name. If there's a problem, throw an exception. So kind of similar-ish to what we were doing structurally before, but the API is a little different. Then we're going to do what we did before with the content resolver. So the same kind of writing out to the content resolver. We're going to get the URI off that file, open an output stream on him, and then print to that output stream. Boom. Again, make sure you use a use there, so it's going to automatically close the guy. So this is going to print out that information there. Once we're done with that, I'm going to dump out the contents of that SAF tree. There we go. So the SAF tree dumping, again, I'm going to run it on the IO dispatcher. We're going to take that tree URI, and we're going to assume, just based on the place this is stuck in there, that he's not going to be null. Depending on your application, on what things are doing, you know, in this particular case, if I pushed this button to dump the tree before I had actually created something, I'd get a null pointer exception out of this. But because I'm always creating the file before I call this guy, I'm okay. So I'm going to require these not null, parse it into a URI, and boom, I have the URI representing the tree root that I now own. I shouldn't say the word own because multiple applications can get permission to write to the same directory. But it's a directory that I have permission to do reads and writes without constantly bothering the user. So I'm going to create a file again from URI, try to find the directory inside there, And then for that directory, I'm going to call list files, which is going to give us a list of document files, or an array of document files, actually. Once I have that array, I'm going to join them to strings separated by new lines, just putting in the name. And if the name's null, no name. That goes in my text on the screen, so that should be good. Okay, so I think, did I have the buttons? I think I put all those buttons in. Yes, I have those 3 buttons on there. Let's go ahead and run this. Okay, buttons all over the place. Let's first of all do our SAF write. Oh, I already did that. Don't have to worry about those ones. Let's do our SAF tree, which is going to try to create something and grab that directory. So first, it's going to come up with the choose a folder. Once again, no information on this, so we're going to need a dialog in between to be able to present that. I'm going to hit create new folder because we can't use the root. I'm going to call it Scott1. And then I'm going to say use this folder. So it's underneath the internal storage Scott1. Well, the fake external storage. And now he's dumping the tree contents. If I hit him again, it's not going to ask me again because I've already reserved that and I already have permission. So every time I'm hitting this again, it's adding on that little appended number because you can't overwrite files using this. You can open files and write to them, but if you're trying to create a new file, it won't overwrite an existing file. It'll just create a brand new number on it like that.